and gentlemen, it is Thursday, May 19th, 2016. Time for the meeting of the Gateway Services Community Development District Board of Supervisors meeting. We have a quorum. Would you please stand and join us in the pledge to our flag and country? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. If you have a noise-making machine such as this, will you please put it on mute for the balance of the meeting? If you wish to speak to the board this evening, the manager will take your requests. Mr. Manager, do we have folks who want to speak this evening?
Yes, sir, we do. First speaker would be George Huskamp and mosquito breeding on Gateway Boulevard.
Good afternoon. My name is George Huskamp, and I reside and own the property at 12820 Vista Pine Circle. I say own the property because at some later date, not tonight, we'll have to discuss the activities of people who are no longer who are not residents as far as their input to the board. For some time now, I've been bringing up to the board the fact that there is an extra amount of pine straw being distributed on Gateway Boulevard. It almost looks like we're growing it instead of distributing it. In addition, there's a place where the pine straw, coupled with roots from two trees, has made a dam across the swale that drains the water coming off Gateway Boulevard. I have given two pictures to the board members to take a look at. One picture shows what the dam actually looks like, and this dam is is approximately across from the office building where the bank used to be. The second picture shows the water that is backed up from that dam during the last rainy season. At one point, when I measured it, it was almost 100 feet of backup. That calculates to, or the width was about 5 feet wide, and the depth was as much as 12 to 14 inches. It's a lot of water. The water stays there for a long period of time because the drainage doesn't percolate through the ground very easily, and but of course it was meant to run past the dam that's there and onto a drainage port that is maybe 15 or 20 feet beyond where the dam is. The problem is twofold. One, the water backing up and sitting there for a week or 2 weeks or maybe even longer kills all the grass underneath it, and so the next crop that grows is weeds. It makes Gateway Boulevard look like a weed patch instead of a horticulture area. Sir? Or you just put I thought you were raising your hand, sorry.
No, you'll know.
Sure I will.
Where is this dam, George?
It is located on the west side of Gateway Boulevard. The dam itself is approximately midway between the north edge and the south edge of the building that used to be Bank of America. No, excuse me, that's where it backs up to. The dam itself is on approximately the south edge of the building that housed Bank of America.
And it's on the east side?
West side,
Other side of the street?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, Ed Tinkle, didn't you bring this up a couple of meetings prior to this?
Yeah, this issue was developed when we did the white paper. We knew that we had problems on the WCI road segments with drainage, predominantly on the west side, but some on the east. And I thought, and the county made it perfectly clear that there would be positive drainage all the way down that right of way. Well, if you go out there and look at what George described, it's over the time has humped up and the water just won't flow from A to B. But that's not the only place where we have problems. But I just am waiting to see what the county does when they come out for an inspection, because I can't believe they're going to approve it.
And that, was that WC, I'm sorry.
It's the WCI, that segment's WCI's, yeah.
So
But
is
it's,
anybody alerted thanks for alerting us, but has anybody alerted the county, obviously, so that,
I haven't talked to the county, Gary.
George?
No, the only group I know to talk to is this group. I don't go outside the subdivision to talk to people.
Well,
That,
but,
that brings up a point.
Yeah.
Excuse me. That brings up a point. We're going to be responsible for the landscaping, you know, when this whole thing is done.
Correct.
And it's going to be immensely difficult to maintain landscaping in those areas and even further south, along the west side where instead of putting in piping for drainage years ago, we put in the bubble ups that are from the center that go out, and it just makes it worse because that ground is so uneven and there's not enough slope. But the ball's going to be in our park that trying to get mowers in there, they're just going to sink.
Hey,
So it really needs to be fixed.
and isn't there areas, I don't know, George, if it's around the same area, but when we get heavy rain, it bleeds into the sidewalk. And there's,
Last year, it was coming up to the road.
yeah, because
in
I
that
know
area
it
he's
bleeds on
talking about,
that
it's
sidewalk,
coming up
and
to
what
the
you get
road.
is a lot of mud debris on that sidewalk area, because I run down that.
Yeah, we have two inlets in that area that will easily transfer the water to the ponds. The problem is the water can't get to the inlets.
so then, how do we alert the county before we have this dumped in our lap? That is
I
a
think it's
question
in
to
our
you,
lap
George.
already.
That is a question to you, George.
I think it's in our lap
Hey, jump
already.
in.
We've been
It's in our lap now.
maintaining, not maintaining.
Not really. No.
I
From
think-
what again, correct me if I'm wrong, until the county accepts the road, we have the ability to alert them to something that wasn't corrected. Am I incorrect?
I think you're on target. I think the issue is that since we have and we've signed into, or going to sign into the agreement, that maintenance on the landscape responsibility, we need to go to the county and indicate that we cannot honor that with the grading being deficient.
All right, now the real guy comes in here.
No, I'm just sort of the guy over in the corner. I guess one question is, I'm not sure, I can't recall, I think RWA is doing the survey for WCI is also going to be doing it for the county as required for the conveyance of the road. I don't know if they've yet performed a survey in the field, topographical survey, or record drawings or as-built of that area. And I guess that's a question whether or not Danny or April can contact RWA and say, have you performed the survey on that segment? If so, can you tell us what it shows, and if there are, it should show up. As Ed said, if there are variations in the elevations, that should show up.
Is it RWA or Holmontes?
Or Holmontes, excuse me.
Okay.
Holmontes, yeah, Holmontes, yeah.
But
Yeah,
is there
apologies.
fiduciary relationship with WCI as compared to?
Well, they're working
Do
for
you see what I'm
WCI,
saying?
and I
Right,
don't
but
know.
I think it's one of those, to ask them if they've done it, then if it doesn't show, then we'd say, why doesn't it, there's an issue. And then, if they don't address it, then notify the county.
We certainly should have some position of objection because of the fact that we have a responsibility to maintain the landscaping. It's gonna be very difficult to maintain that
Right,
landscaping
but it may already
as
be,
built.
it may already show up on the surveys, I don't know. And again, at Home Montez, if not, then you let them know and then let the county know.
We had plenty of time during the design period to see how that whole area drains. So a blind man would have been the only one that would have not have seen that that has a slope problem out there. And it should have been on the drawings. Now, I'm not gonna go back and say that Whole Montes didn't do their job. They may have done their job and somebody said not to put it in the plans.
All
So I
right, so
don't know
the
the answer.
compatible way of doing this and getting what we need might be for Tetra Tech. Tyler looked at me, Danny didn't. Tetra Tech to make the communication with Whole Montez, indicating
correction.
what our concerns might be. Does that, rest of the board, does that sound like a reasonable thing to do?
Board members, you have any comment on that?
It- Is the, Ed or George, is the issue a matter of just blockage through a tree, or, I mean, if that passageway was clear, would that then feed the water system, or feed the water through, and that would resolve the issue, or is it more technical than that?
Where George is referring to you across from the old bank, tree roots have certainly made it bad. They're basically creating the damming. The only way I know you're gonna do it through there is you're either gonna cut down the trees and/or to be able to shape the ditch, and/or you go back in and you do it the old-fashioned way, hard pipe it.
What was that?
Hard pipe it. Just simply go in and put in inlets at the low spots and then connect it with pipe and work around the
'Cause
trees.
there's issues all up and down
I
there.
would say there's probably a good 5 oaks that are blocking what George is talking about.
Just two
Just 2? Just 2?
pictures over there.
Now, it runs all the way from the entrance to Gateway Greens all the way down, so it's almost the
All the way
full
down to
length of
Hidden
Mahogany
Lakes.
runs south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None
But
of
there's,
those- None of the other oak trees though are in the way, just the
okay,
two right on
no
side of
roots,
it.
okay.
So, Danny,
So it could be hard piping.
you, make sense?
Thank you.
And I think there's a comment coming from
April?
Cal and April.
Mr. Huskamp and I went out and did a drive-by on Gateway, and we went out and visited the trees, and clearly it's a palm, I apologize, I don't know what type of palm it is, a cabbage palm or something, and a large oak tree. They're so close together that the oak roots have spread into the palm ball, and really probably by running something through there or digging under it, it's probably going to kill both trees. So really, it's a matter of, I believe that issue is our landscaping issue, and it's a matter of, do we want to take down the trees, a very large, healthy oak that's on the road there, or do we want to try to attempt to excavate under it and create some sort of water drainage under the root system, or simply make the decision to cut down the trees and dig out the roots?
Well, again, I think we're kind of jumping to a different angle. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get WCI to be the one to take on the responsibility, not for us.
I thought we were responsible for the landscaping along the roadways there.
The roadway and the drainage has to be delivered in a correct condition, therefore, we're kind of cart after the horse.
Okay, I think the
So-
walkthrough's scheduled for the 23rd, so we'll reach out to them.
We need to be careful here. I can recall, at one time, I think WCI was cutting down a whole bunch of those trees, and we, backed them up. Between them and Lee County, we could have had an awful mess. So we're gonna be real careful in allowing folks to do whatever has to be done.
April, is it feasible, I'm looking at this picture, is it feasible to move the palm tree, leave the oak tree in place, and allow the drainage to go around the oak tree?
Well, relative to the value of the oak tree versus the palm, I think that would be our sacrificial lamb of what we would want to try to take out first. Whether or not you could dig out that root ball without significantly damaging the oak, I don't know. That would probably be a question better for Elle to handle. But she is definitely aware of it, and the root system is definitely very, very close.
So it sounds like we've got two potential issues. One is just the status of the drainage along that side, whether it's up to specs. And the two is, do we have plants or trees that are impeding that flow? So, I mean, if we're pushing back on WCI to make sure they're adhering to whatever the requirements are is one thing, but if we're impeding, that's gonna be our issue. So I think what you were saying is let's go back, or with the walkthrough, identify the throughway all the way, or the drainage problem all along that side. And if part of the resolution is, well, we can't do anything unless this tree is removed or cut back, then that becomes part of our issue.
It sounds good, except I get willies when I think about cutting down trees after what we went through last year.
Well, I mean, I know that there's, that drainage problem has been bleeding over into the sidewalks. So we've repaved those sidewalks, and I know there's several places where we've got water build up, and it ends up being muddy, and I know from personal experience that because I run down that path, or down that sidewalk, where it's not only slippery, but when there's a lot of water, you can't get through there, so.
I had one suggestion, if you don't mind me throwing it in. I don't like to try to find the simple ways, but I suggest that you take a very small bucket and just run a ditch between the two trees, and if the trees then fall, die out because of the work that was done with a very narrow bucket, 6-inch bucket or something like that, then it's just nature taking care of it, and it's not Gateway Services.
Sounds awful simple.
I know. That's my stock and trade.
Danny, did you have something for us? Thank you, George.
Yeah, we'll reach out to Ho Montez. I want to make sure this is a drainage issue. So we're simply gonna ask them how they're gonna solve this problem. If they come back to us and suggest that there's a vegetation issue, then we can address that. But as far as I'm concerned right now, this is a drainage issue.
Yeah.
So,
Board members okay with that for now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, George.
Okay, Mr. Huskamp had two, and I see he sat down, but, yeah, this is the status of irrigation with new developments.
Second verse, same as the first. My name is George Huskamp. I live at 12820 Vista Pines Circle, and I own that property. There's some numbers that I'm only partially aware of as far as the irrigation system, but let me back up just a little bit. I think that although you've heard me talk before the board quite frequently, I'd say that in general the board, and I said this to Supervisor or to Chairman Guy the other day, I think in general that the board handles the important issues, important in quotation marks, very well. The place that I think that the board sometimes shies away is taking care of things that the little stuff, but it's the stuff that affects residents day in and day out in their everyday life. I've been chastised by one current board member that I'm wasting the board's time. I don't think it's wasting the board's time if problems exist and they're being overlooked and they need to be brought up, just like this simple little thing about a tree. The world's not coming to an end and over that tree or that dam, but there's one other thing that fits into there, and that is that we're with 100 feet of water. It's a mosquito breeder, and we have a nationwide health problem right now that we don't want to contribute to, which is standing water breeding mosquitoes. So I think that those are the types of things that I would hope that the board would take a harder look at, instead of just when someone like myself comes up and they turn off their hearing aid. Now, that being said, I'm concerned about the irrigation the availability of irrigation water at my house. I have had, on 2 occasions, I've had problems and had worked with the staff to get the adequate irrigation water. And as I told you at the last meeting, the solution was they finally, Ivan upped the pressure at the pump, so it went from 80 pounds to 90 pounds, and that was sufficient. I'm very concerned that when, here's some numbers. The other day I saw that there are, I think it was 1,900 doors in Gateway. Is that the right number? Residents or voting members.
Maybe voting. There's a lot more than that.
Well, anyway, I'm having trouble right now. Not today, but I've had trouble over the last couple of months. Right now, if I can't adequately water my property, my grass, when 1 or 2 of the neighbors adjacent to me are watering at the same time. So, but the time that's only a 2 or 3 hour period when you follow the rules from the Southwest Florida Management. Now, if you take that and you add something like the fact that Pelican Preserve eventually is going to be on 100% on the irrigation system supplied by Gateway, and right now it's something like 20%, I was told right before the meeting. Plus you add to that another 600 or plus more doors, and you're talking about a total of maybe ends up being 1,100 new doors that aren't on aren't on the service right now, and another 600 beyond that that are just coming, the ground is being broken, but that's as far as it goes. I don't see how anything that is going on right now is going to handle that kind of irrigation water. When I talked to you all about it the last time, I talked to you, Mr. Doctor, I'll get it right in a minute, Chairman Guy, and you said that you had been assured by Tetra Tech that there was adequate water in the system, and that you were going to recheck with Danny and see if you could get a little more information or whatever, a confirmation. And so one of my questions is, did you get a confirmation from Danny that that's the case, and is that a written report that I could get a hold of and see what the status is?
If you'll stand one step to the right, you're gonna get your confirmation right now.
Verbal or written?
For the record, Danny Knowles with Tetra Tech. Well, to correct one thing, it's not 100% from Pelican Preserve, will not be the majority of, well, what's existing in Pelican Preserve historically will always remain in the city limits as part of the city of Fort Myers. So it's just the new, which is about 20%. So, we've prepared reports in the past in terms of supply, and as the system develops, there will be a need for, additional supply wells. We're sure of that. You're not at that point yet. As far as the pressure issue goes, we're still looking at the model, but we haven't heard of any pressure, issues otherwise. So, we'll be able to come back at the next meeting with that. Our modelers are still looking at that. So, but that was the pressure issue. As far as supply, nothing has changed there. And as it sits today, there's adequate supply, as we have the allocation from the groundwater wells to make up the difference for the supplement.
That's a lot of words, but my recollection is that 2 years ago, when we were trying to decide whether the Pelican Preserve was gonna be part of the city of Fort Myers or part of the Gateway, and just about everybody wanted to be part of Gateway, you or somebody told us that we had plenty of water and plenty of pressure to take care of all of this.
Yes, the model was reviewed at that time, and the recommendation was to place the parallel line that has been placed, and that'll relieve a lot of the pressure loss that you have. Now that's since been installed, so that has provided relief. As far as supply goes, you use 100% of the water produced, the reclaimed water produced by Lee County's Gateway plant. That water is sent to a ground storage tank, and it's blended with groundwater. Those that from Gateway's groundwater wells. You have the ability to install additional wells in the future should that be required. But as it sits today, you have that supply. I haven't heard from staff or anybody that you are running out of the ability to keep that tank full or have water in it to supply for irrigation. And we are probably in the peak right now of even though we've had rain in the last few days, we're in the peak of the dry season, because this is when it's the hottest and the water levels are typically at their lowest. So people will be using more water this month for the next couple of weeks at least, and then you're going to see that drop off. But I have not heard from staff or anybody that we have an issue in terms of supply, and that is monitored.
George.
From staff or the people that
He doesn't say anything important. Give you some references if you'd like.
So, I mean, we'll look at the supply again, but, we've done the numbers based on what your current population and what your historical demands have been. And again, even if that got to be to that point, you have the ability to install additional groundwater wells to make up the difference.
So Danny, let me ask you a question. So I understand you're modeling on supply, and we're not there yet, so we've got plenty of water. But in regards to pressure, how do we test for pressure? So if George says, I have an issue with pressure, he goes out to his yard, and I actually own a house next to him, and you can see that the pressure's not there. And George has a pressure monitor on his you know, on his unit, and you can see that it's at 90 psi's or wherever, and he can say that I know at certain times it's not providing the amount of pressure that we need. How do we test for that? How do we ensure that we've got the right amount of pressure?
You'd have to install pressure gauges on the system. Now when the model was developed, the system was calibrated, and that's how the system's calibrated is pressure sensors are placed out in the system at various points, and then the model is developed. So the model, you input, you know, pipe size, diameter, lengths, runs, wherever there's a connection point, that sort of thing. And what you have on the computer should match what the real world is. So when you put these sensors out there,
It'll tell you what your readings are throughout the system.
and it should, well, it should match. It should match. So what if it reads, you know, 40 psi in the system? Your model should be, you're going to calibrate it until that model matches as close as possible to what the real world is. But that's how, I mean, we could certainly, you know.
But we don't have that today.
We have the model, and we do have a calibrated model. But to specifically answer your question, sensors can be placed in the system to actually look if there's an area that is of particular question. And that's actually a way that if the model is showing one thing, so let's say the model is showing that you should have 60 psi, and you see it dribbling out of, you know, pressure head, so you stick a pressure sensor on there, and sure enough, maybe it's at 40. Then that's telling you there's an issue in the system, like possibly some blockage or a valve that may be partially closed. So that is a way to, you know, to look. So, I mean, certainly pressure sensors, and Gateway does have pressure sensors. Now, the pressure sensors that you have are meant to screw onto a nozzle. So you would have to, you know, temporarily create a way to stick that pressure sensor on there, but that can certainly be done.
And I would imagine that's not too expensive.
No, it's not that expensive. So, I mean, that can certainly, if there are places that, you know, that we know of in the community that are having issues that don't match what we see in the model, that can certainly be done.
Well, we know of one.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Are you finished?
Yeah, I am, thank you.
Other board members? Thank you,
May I
Danny.
make one more statement? I would agree with you that when you listen to Danny, I believe he said that there is a water problem. And in spite of talking about pressure sensors and the model and this and that and the other, I'm the guy that's trying to keep his lawn from turning into a desert. Not that bad yet, because my wife takes real good care of it. But I think it's time to start doing something instead of just talking about it. And I think today what I heard, we're just talking about it. We've got to make some moves. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Mr. Manager?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ed Tinkle, budget and the facility plan.
Yeah, I'll hold off on the facility plan until later when you have that. Ed Tinkle, 11180 Bent Pine Drive. After months and months of doing a lot of work and y'all's approval of the pond maintenance standards in January of this year, the committee has been working quite a bit in trying to implement the standards that are within that standard itself. And most of that has to do with littoral maintenance. Well, at the last meeting, we presented the budget, or you had the initial draft of the budget. And under pond maintenance, we had the same old $100,000 contractual amount that's been in there since one pursuant to the agreement with Aquagenics. Elle and I and April, George with Aquagenics, and JJ with Aquagenics met earlier this week. We're in the process of trying to develop a list of tasks to be performed relative to littoral maintenance by Aquagenics to supplement or amend their contract. Right now, we don't have anything in the budget, and in the discussion with April, and I'm pulling these numbers from the dark side, but they're the best we have to go on until Aquagenics can get out there as a result of Elle going out and trying to determine pond by pond what needs to be done relative to littorals to come into compliance with these standards. Aquagenics had given us a number of about 45 cents per lineal foot. And when you calculate that for our 180,000 lineal feet, you come up with about, April, $53,000. And again, that number is really crude. It's only a estimation of littoral maintenance costs. But I suggested to April that going forward and until we can get a more refined number from Aquagenics, and they are working on that as we speak, to put in the budget at least for at this point in time a number of around $53,000.
Down from 100?
Adding to 100,000, adding to 100,000, yes. This is pure maintenance, doesn't have anything to do with any capital expense of littoral plantings or anything like that. We've got 59 ponds that Ella's going to go out and look at, and we know probably a third of those ponds have no littorals whatsoever. But we got several ponds like 114 over at Eagle Point that are just loaded with littorals that need to have a first fix, as George described it, to go in and clean them up, to get them in a position then to do monthly maintenance on, to control them to the widths and the heights that we described in the pond maintenance standards. George, I would describe, I guess, wants somebody to somewhat hold his hand and describe the level of effort that we envision for each of the ponds, to describe how many lineal feet, or to put 2 dots on a map that he can go back on a leaf of map and determine how many lineal feet or how many square feet that he has to convert that to. But bottom line is, right now, I don't know what your final number or what your drop dead date is on your budget, but 53,000 would be a good number to guesstimate of putting in there, such that when George comes back, it might go to 75, it might go to 25, I don't know. We do know that he gave us a price just to do one pond, 114, is $2,900. But 114 is a horrible pond, so the only thing we have is to go by this. But my recommendation and point for bringing it forward is that we didn't have anything in the budget right now for littoral maintenance. So we had that meeting, and we're trying to get this put together. And we also know that this date is going to go a long way, because our contract with Aquagenics expires, I believe, in October, which means we need to be putting together a new specification for all of our wetland and pond maintenance to be able to get out not only to Aquagenics but other possible vendors. And this time we want to be able to definitively tell them, on this pond you'll do this, 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 and this. On this pond you'll do this. Much like what Pelican Preserve has already done on theirs, and I think they're way ahead of us, but we're trying to catch up with them.
Thank you. Questions for Ed?
Did they give you a time as to when they could possibly give you a price?
Well, he's waiting on us, obviously, to get the maps back to him, but what we were talking, 4 to 6 weeks. I think 4 to 6 weeks was the time. What we need to know is, will 4 to 6 weeks work with you guys on your budget to refine that number? When do you need a drop dead final number?
2 weeks.
2 weeks? Looks like 53,000 is going to be a good number then.
We've got to adopt the high-level budget June 2nd.
Then we need to find out from George if 53,000 is going to be sufficiently high. We can make that call.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And our last resident requesting to speak is Miss Jane Schaefer.
I'm Jane Schaefer. I live in Pelican Preserve. I have a house in Diamante Way, and I'm here to speak about golf carts in Pelican Preserve. And I want to bring you up to date on the progress of your December 2nd, 2015 resolution, where you authorized by a 5-0 vote a study of a traffic engineer. This study was left in the hands of Mr. Phil Mazie, chairman of the PAC and chairman of the Safety and Security Committee, to compose a subcommittee to list the specific interest to ensure the traffic study would be all inclusive and to the satisfaction of the Safety Security Committee. As of last Thursday, no progress had been made by the PAC Safety and Security Committee to engage a traffic engineer, and I believe there had not been any thought given to it. I suggest that this Board of Supervisors move quickly ahead to engage a traffic engineer so the residents of Pelican Preserve, golf cart riders, and any mobiles on the road or pedestrians will be safe. I met with Carl Caracas, Engineering Division, Transportation Engineer for the City of Fort Myers in reference to this situation. And the first thing he said, who made the decision to put your golf carts in the car truck lane? All, and Mr. Gephardt has been through this experience, all lakes, land, and roads must have a permit to make such a decision. WCI did not change the original Pelican Preserve DRI or construction plans that were taken over by CDD. And because they did not change it, it is still in effect. I was told the following: City Fort Myers ordinances states that Pelican Preserve is a designated golf community. The residents who bought in a home in Pelican Preserve were told to drive their golf carts in the designated golf cart lane on the lined far right part of the 4-lane roads. Residents who have golf carts have the legal right to travel in that lane. The far right lane is a golf cart lane. However, bicycles can ride in any part of the road. The designated golf cart lane is not to have any markings. All bicycle chevrons must be removed from the designated golf cart lane. And finally, a committee such as this does not have the authority to make changes to the transportation ordinance of the City of Fort Myers or to the state statutes. And again, it's the roads, the water, and the resources that create these limitations. Now, WCI did not change the traffic building construction procedures. DRI, Development Regional Impact, has not been changed in reference to the dedicated golf cart community 4-lane roads in Pelican Preserve. There is no permit on file stating that Pelican Preserve has changed the designated golf cart lane. Back to the question, who made the decision to put our golf carts in the car truck lane? I can't answer that, and I'm not interested in knowing who did it. But I will tell you the determination was made by a non-governmental, non-authorized person who was well aware of a legal opinion that Pelican Preserve is a designated golf cart community. Mr. Perez made a statement that the Master Association has no authority over the rules governing the traffic on roads owned by CDD. And additionally, while we're going through this, I think it's very, very important for the safety of everyone in our community. We are requesting that golf cart residents safely exit in and out, not on the road, as we've been told you must go in and out on the road, but on the 5-foot sidewalk parallel to the golf cart from Trentino to Tree Line Boulevard to get to Fort Myers 8-foot walkway that leads to Colonial.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Shaver?
So there hasn't been any effort to do a traffic study at all?
No, instead they decided that they would redo the laws for golf carts, which I was told, and I just told you, that we don't have the opportunity to do that. That they come from the statutes, then they come down to the city, and they come down to Pelican Preserve. And in order to do something so serious, you have to go through the process. Yes, sir.
Hold on just one second. Are there other questions for Jane at this time? Robert, did you?
No, there's a statement.
What's that?
There's a statement.
From?
Me, part of the safety committee.
Go ahead.
Okay. Believe me, there has been untold hours of work, untold hours of people's contribution, untold hours of thought process for this. And I realize it's a personal issue. But to say that there hasn't been an effort on this is absolutely untrue.
May I say something?
Well, I didn't
Okay.
think you wouldn't.
Well, wait a minute. What issue?
Excuse me.
But you're making a statement that it's
No,
untrue.
Bill,
What
this is kind of a personal thing. We want to go down this road too?
No, I don't want to, but if you
Well,
insist.
okay.
All right, may I speak? I wanted to be on that committee.
You were invited to be on the committee.
Well, I asked to be, and I
You
was on the
indicated that.
committee, and when I heard that the committee chairperson was concerned about the arguments and the situation, and I stood right here and heard it, being experienced in coming to consensus like that, I said, I can't be involved in this because I'm not in charge. So I said, I'm not going to be on the committee. And I said it 3 times. And Gary, the committees raised their hand and voted that I would not be on the committee. Now, is that an oxymoron? I said I wouldn't be, and then they voted me off the committee. Then they come back and they ask me if I would join the committee because of the statute, because of my stack of research. I don't get into any of this unless I know what I'm talking about.
Excuse me.
And,
May
yeah.
I say something?
Yes.
I think the one thing I'm getting out of this is, I know you guys have some personal things going on, but does the committee have the right legally to make those changes or decisions, A, and was there a traffic study, B? So I think if anyone else can address that, is that, and Jane said that the committee did not legally have the right to make that decision that the golf carts had to be in the street. So can someone else, does someone else have another opinion that is a legal opinion?
All right, my opinion came from Carl Caracas, and he's at the city level, and he was the one who said, who made this decision? And I had to say, I don't know. All I know is it's not right to have golf carts going in the car truck lane when we have cars and we have some speeders and we have trucks and we have delivery people and we have buses, all kinds of things.
Jane, could you stand aside for just one?
I'll sit
No,
down.
just stand. Mr. Garrett has been waving his hand like crazy.
And I know Nancy's gonna talk to.
And just real quick, I just want to make sure I understand what the issue is, and it's whether or not the golf carts should be allowed to drive on the sidewalk and not
Not the sidewalk.
Not the
or
sidewalk.
the well, what it,
Designated for golf
okay,
cart
the
line.
the golf cart path,
Yes.
as opposed to being required to drive on the road. Is that
That's substantially correct.
that's the okay? Thank you.
I guess for clarification, it's a lane, it's a marked area between the curb and about 4 feet on the, I'll call it the right side of the roadway.
And that's only in Pelican Preserve.
Correct.
Right, because I
And
don't
it's
see.
only, if I recall,
It's only on one
it's
road,
only in the
couple
four-
roads.
It's in the 4-lane sections only.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's only on a couple
Thank
sections.
you.
Okay, I'm Bob Geppert, I'm with PPAC. I have nothing to do with the Traffic and Safety Committee, other than to hear the reports that Gary alluded to. We heard loudly and clearly in December that the recommendation of our safety group was rejected. And for the benefit of the new members, the Safety and Work Committee resigned en masse in January, or December. And we constituted a new group, and this time we changed the leadership to Filmeezy. And from then until now, they've been churning up and doing things. I don't know the particulars of what they're doing. Bill's been on it. He knows far better than I do, or Gary. But my purpose in talking today is to let the process work. I know a heck of a lot more about it than you guys, and I don't know that much about it. And all I'm saying is we have a process in place. I really believe very strongly that the process should work. Mr. Guy was kind enough to come to our last meeting, and he very firmly reminded me, and I think some of the other members, that we have been neglectful in not doing the traffic study. That was one of our charges. Everybody understood that. I'm not quite sure how it slipped through the cracks, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. They understand what they need to do, and all I'm asking is give them a chance to do their job. They're going to get a traffic study. Then we get into the who struck John, or whether you should do the study in August, whether you should do the study at peak season. We're not going to get into it. We'll do it now. And that's what the decision of PPAC was last week. So I just personally just feel it's a little untimely. I know, Jane gets, wound up in this, and that's good. That's not bad. But we have a process. Let's the process work. And that's really all I'd like the board to do. We are not going to be belligerently disobeying anything. We got the message loud and clear.
Hold on just one second.
Sure.
Questions for Bob?
A statement.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Well, a statement was made that the residents were told that that was a golf cart lane. As most everybody knows, I gave 4 years of my life to being part of the new home sales team there, and never, and believe me, I'm rather cognizant, never, ever, ever did WCI management or any other of the folk tell people that were purchasing properties there during the tenure that I had that that was a golf cart lane, ever. So that statement that was made, what I'm trying to say is not correct.
Well, I am one of those people who bought a home during that period, and we were told by the salesperson that that was our golf cart lane.
You were probably told that you had impact glass, just like I was told when I was hired, but.
I don't want to get into that. The fact is that we were told that that was our golf cart lane. I
That's
don't care
unique to
what
you, Bill.
told your customer.
So
But
why
let's-
can't you
let's-
ride your golf carts on the golf cart path? Is someone stopping
Well,
you?
this is
Is
on
it a
the street.
violation?
You ride on a path when you're on the golf course. When you're out in the community, going to the town center, going to visit a
Yeah.
neighbor, then you're on the, streets. We have 2 lanes in most cases, and what we refer to as the bike lane. And some golf cart riders ride in the road, the way I personally think they should. Some ride when there's nobody else in the bike lane, I have not a clue as to what the law is.
Well, then why don't you just
Well,
let us take it from there. Thank
okay.
you very much.
Again, my comments were to the process, not to the particulars of what's right or
Well,
wrong.
hold on just one second
Sure.
with the process. Would it help the process if this board decided this afternoon to engage a traffic engineer now, promptly, today, or soon, and get this thing going? You folks have been fiddling with it for 5 months.
You're asking me, well, it hasn't been 5 months, it's only May, we didn't get direction, let's be realistic about it, it's been about 3 months,
It's
4
been
months,
5 months.
but whatever, okay. If you're asking my opinion, I'm gonna say I think it would be terrible.
You think it would be?
I think it would be terribly received by PPAC, and it wouldn't surprise me if it had a mass resignation. If that's what you're looking for, then go right ahead. I'm just telling you, you asked, otherwise I wouldn't say it. We have a process. The process is to let things that pertain to Pelican Preserve be handled by Pelican Preserve. If there's willful disbelief or disobedience, then you should step right up and correct that. Absolutely. But as long as they're doing the process, give them time to do it. We've had things in that community that have gone on for months and months, even years. So 4 months for this is, and we haven't had a single accident. We haven't had anybody hurt. It's not like we got bodies lying all over the community. I know of one guy that rolled his golf cart over because he narcolepsy and fell asleep. But I mean, it's not a pressing issue that the body count is rising.
I disagree.
Okay,
but
I understand.
That's my opinion. organization last Thursday. we
No,
had
your organization,
testimony-
yes.
What?
Your organization, we're part of PPAC. PPAC reports to you guys.
At your PPAC meeting last Thursday, standing where you're standing now, we had testimony, your organization, PPAC, had testimony that meant that automobiles were going as fast as 60 miles an hour on those roads. And you expect golf carts to be?
No, I don't expect anything, Bill. I'm not talking about the particulars, I'm talking about the process. We know we have problems. We know we have people that disregard stop signs. We have people that disregard the speed. We know that. And we have a committee that is going to make resolutions to get it fixed.
Thank you, Bob. Any other statements?
You've got one more speaker, Nancy Hall, golf carts at Pelican Preserve.
Nancy Hall, 10511 Bella Vista Drive in Pelican Preserve. I'd like to speak to Pam's question about how this came about in the first place. Pelican Preserve right now is designated a golf cart community in the DRI. Whenever the Board of Supervisors, the people that were sitting on it at the time the decision was made, in conjunction with WCI, the HOA, the CDD, and so forth, voted in a golf cart policy, and that policy pretty much directed everybody to be driving on in the roadway. So it came from this governmental body. It didn't come from PPAC, it didn't come from the HOA, it didn't come from Johnny on the street, it came from this body. As a result of issues that were raised by this, Jane and others, we've been talking about this now for at least 2 years. And as a result of what this board decided to do last December, November, whenever it was, the then work group advised the HOA manager to back away from sending any more guidance out that said you need to drive on the roadways. So now we have people, some of them trying to put a 5-foot golf cart into a 4-foot thing, so we have people riding half in the lane, half in the road. We have people riding all in the road. We have some people that ride in the gutter to get their cars, their golf carts in that lane. So it's clearly not safe no matter how fast the traffic's going, and that is another issue. Yes, the traffic study, by the time that group got constituted, made an internal decision that the timing wasn't right. We heard Chairman Guy loud and clear, and the committee, and he spoke before the committee had a chance to say anything to Mr. Measy about what his findings were that he was reporting. Mr. Guy came to the podium and said, "Where's the study? You need to have the study. The study wasn't done. And if you want the board to take it over, we'd be happy to."
I didn't say that.
It sounded like you did, but. But that was my takeaway. Maybe you didn't say that expressly, but that was clearly the takeaway. In any event, I'm with Bob. The committee got your message, and as far as I'm concerned, Phil and the group are well on their way to making that happen. Now, you say nothing has been done. That committee is putting out all kinds of safety information, things that need to go out to the community. That group has not been idle.
I never said they were.
Well, you're implying that just
did not
because
imply.
they didn't do one
I
thing.
did not imply.
Okay, well,
I said that you had not begun work on the traffic engineer's safety that the board authorized last December, and you haven't.
That's accurate. I agree with that.
we're not arguing that, Bill.
I know, you're diverting to everything else instead of getting on point.
Well, the question was asked earlier about how we got here and who had the authority. This board was the one that put out our current golf cart policy. We worked with Mr. Pires, we worked with the manager who was here then. It was something that there's a resolution by this board, and I don't know the relationship this board wants to have with the city. I don't know the person that Ms. Schaefer talked to. But at the time that that was done, no issues were raised that we had to go to the city for anything, because this board was the governmental board that had the authority. And PPAC never was going to be independently doing anything. We know we don't have authority. We bring everything up through the Board of Supervisors as a recommendation.
Who put the bicycle chevrons on the golf cart lane?
I don't know.
Nobody knows. They just magically appeared.
I remember when we had a discussion about paying for putting it in. I don't know who prompted it, but, all right, we know we had a budget discussion.
I was off the committee for 2 years. I don't know.
Do you agree with Bob that the process, quote unquote, should take its course? Or do you think that it's time after 5 months that this board should take control and engage the traffic engineer?
I would suggest that you, after your speech to the PPAC a week ago,
Thursday.
I think that you owe it to PPAC to give them at least till our next PPAC meeting to show you that progress has been made.
So can I ask you a question? What is it that Pelican Preserve needs? What are you asking for?
There's an issue that the roads are unsafe because of a couple of reasons: the traffic, amount of traffic, and the speeds that traffic travel.
Okay, I understand that.
And golf carts can't be on it. The lane that Mrs. Schaefer and others want to travel in is too narrow.
So you need to expand.
Something needs to change, whether
So
it's.
you need an alternative. What you're asking
Well,
for.
no. We're asking for a traffic study that says what the best thing to do for the community is. There are options. There are options. There are options that were looked at, like widening the sidewalk and the cost of it. There were options looked at about narrowing the lanes and the cost of it. Since it originally was not designated in the original DRI as a golf cart community, but only is a golf cart community in the new DRI because of the actions taken by this group, it's kind of an afterthought fit, if you will.
Okay.
So what's happening now is to try to get that situation corrected.
Okay.
And
And the reason why I ask is from what I've seen of Pelican Preserve and the PPAC, there's a lot of thought that goes into if there's issues or things of that nature. I just want to be clear on what you're asking either the board to do or the board not to do. If you need an engineering study and you want to do that, that's fine. But if you know that there's a certain solution and it's a majority of the residents say this is what we need, based on the current issues, we need an expansion of the path, or we need this. If you can't make that determination because you don't have all the statistical data, then let's figure out how to get there. I just want to be clear on what you're asking. Me, and I'm new, so I just want to. I don't
Right.
have all the history, so
I
I'm trying to
appreciate-
figure out how we can help you.
I appreciate that, and I think
Okay.
that what the supervisors can do today is to give us a little bit more room after the message that Supervisor Guy delivered to us last Thursday, and before some of us had a chance to comment on what PPAC, what the committee was recommended. Give that group time, another 3 weeks would be our next PPAC meeting to report out on what we've accomplished. You all are in the middle of budgets, we're in the middle of budgets, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. And we've also, with respect to that study, we've collected a lot of data already, because one of the things the safety group has done is put speed monitoring signs in, and we capture the data. That's how we know how fast cars are going at times. That's information that perhaps an engineer could use, because we have an issue off-season. We probably have higher speeds because we have lower volumes. In season, we have a significant higher volume of traffic on the road, so it's going to be a difficult. So
Thank you. Wait, just a second. Jane, are you finished?
no, I would just like 30 seconds.
To the podium, please.
Okay, and this has become, as you can tell, very, very tense, and it's just unnecessary. What probably all of you don't understand is Florida has statutes, and those statutes speak to all of this. And I've read the statutes, and I can tell a lot of people that have faced this issue have not, because once you read the statutes, it's very clear. And then the statutes are going down to our city ordinances, and they all have to come down, and they can come down to us in Pelican and change a few things. But the three things that we cannot change without getting a permit is the lakes, the reservoirs, or, not the reservoirs, the,
Road.
roads and the, no. It's just slipping my mind. But it's our resources. Like someone can't come along and say, oh, I'm gonna dig down in here because I know you've got oil, and just go on the farm and do it. You have to go through a process, and the process is, I don't think, simple. So if the committee proceeds, I'm just asking that they fit within with what the laws of our state is, the laws of what our city is, and then come to a conclusion.
I hate to, thank you, Jane, I hate to end this so unceremoniously, but we are under the gun to begin a public hearing at 4 o'clock, and it's already a few minutes after 4. Mr. Newbound, are you pointing towards someone that I can't see, or are you trying to get my attention?
Yes, I'm trying to get divine intervention. For Doug's understanding, there has been a traffic study. And to better understand, you need to also take a run over to Pelican Reserve, drive down Pelican Reserve Boulevard, take a look at that part that's on the right-hand side of the road, and then imagine some of the other theories that people have said, that to be able to make that wider, that you'd have to take the existing 2 lanes and you'd actually have to shrink them. Or we've got to rip up that entire road, expand off to the side, move the sidewalks as well, and spend $1 gazillion on remanufacturing that entire road.
Well,
Okay,
are you
thanks.
finished?
For now.
Thanks, but 2 things that I hate to continue this. I drive a golf cart periodically. I used to drive one virtually every day. And you can drive a golf cart in that lane. I've done it on many occasions and kept inside the lane. That 4-foot, 5-foot business is what's baloney. Secondly, there was a traffic study done. It was done about 3 years ago. And the people who were in charge of PPAC at the time decided they didn't like what it said, because it said the golf cart should be in that far right same line. So they just submarined it. They just discarded it, and only recently was it brought to light. It's a very difficult subject, and
Okay.
we probably aren't going to solve anything tonight, and we have to have our public hearing. Mr. Attorney, since it's the bewitching hour, is it appropriate for me to ask Mr. Danny Nelson to proceed with his PowerPoint presentation on our SRF application for the Lake Bank Restoration Project, so that everybody in the room is on the same page?
I think what you want to do is open the public hearing and also indicate for the record, I thought I had brought it with me, the notice, the affidavit of the notice of publication of today's hearing that was in the Fort Myers News Press, I believe May 9th, 2016, was the date of the notice of the public hearing. But I would suggest you open the public hearing and indicate that we have for the record, and we will include in the record the legal notice for the hearing. And then if you wish to have Mr. Nelson introduce the topic and then open up to the public and the board thereafter.
All right, in accordance with an advertisement that was put in the Fort Myers News Press on May the 9th, in accordance with the resolution from this board, I hereby declare that a public hearing is open for the purpose of considering the district's state revolving fund application for the district's Lake Bank Restoration Project. Mr. Nelson, please proceed.
For the record, Danny Nelson with Tetra Tech. We're gonna open up a PowerPoint presentation. It'll be on your screens, but I have physical copies if anybody wants.
I think I have.
I'm good.
Mr. Gifford needs a copy.
Okay,
I'll
so
need one for the record.
you can have this one.
Okay.
For that one. Okay, so previously you had received an email with the actual facilities plan and the capital financing plan, which are the portions required by DEP for the SRF. So this presentation just simply outlines the facilities plan, and then we can open it up to public comment. So a little background. In 2014 or thereabouts, the Water Management District, South Florida Water Management District, was notified of some significant erosion at various locations. Gateway retained Morris Riley to go do surveys of lake banks. Using that information, physical inspections by Tetra Tech and Gateway staff, and using information that Elle has accumulated over the past several years of doing inspections on our own, the lake banks in general were prioritized. So the Tier 1 prioritization were the initial 17 lakes. In 2015, we moved forward with piloting the first initial 4, and that was lakes 104, and then the 3 triplet lakes 106, 7, and 8. That work has been accomplished, or primarily accomplished, and that leaves 13 lakes essentially that are remaining, which are now a part of this SRF. So you'll go to the next slide. So that includes a list of lakes that you see here. On the map, I know it's hard to see, but the colors are blue and aqua, and why they chose, and then the green are essentially the preserves. But the aqua, the lighter blue, those are the lakes that we're talking about here. I'm definitely not going to tell you what's what because I can't read that small. So the requirements, well, and I'll kind of back up. As part of this process, it was determined the best method forward was to seek SRF funding. SRF is a state revolving fund. It's administered through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in Florida, and their requirements are what you see here for getting funding. The first step, which has already been accomplished, is to submit a request for inclusion. That request for inclusion essentially gets you on their list and approved for funding. That took place a few months ago. The next step is to prepare the facilities plan and submit it. First part of that is to publicly advertise it. So we've accomplished that. It's been publicly advertised. When we send the documents in, we will include a copy of that advertisement. And then, of course, we're presenting that today. And along with that, we will be seeking a resolution for the board to adopt. That's also a requirement to submit those 3 items once we're done today. Once that goes into to DEP, they will review the facilities plan and they will send it out to all other state agencies for their input. Majority of state agencies, DOT for instance, they will have no say. They'll say it does not involve us, and they'll send it back to DEP and say thank you very much. DEP typically takes about 45 to 60 days to review and approve. Or to ask questions. I've yet to see one where they actually ask questions. It's generally a formality, and unless there's an issue, environmental issue or something else, and it's going through the process to make sure you're meeting the requirements. The next step is to prepare and submit plans to them. With those plans, they will have requirements that you have to meet, and that's their supplemental conditions, which we've listed. And part of that is that you're demonstrating you're meeting Davis-Bacon wage rates. There's a Buy American requirement and some other items. And then the last thing is to release that to bid. And we're using the pre-qualification process, and we've already discussed the pre-qualification process with DEP, so they're aware we're going through that. So once we get a package ready, DEP's blessed it, that will go out solely to those pre-qualified contractors. So the facilities plan itself, the first component of it is describing what the project is, and essentially that's the restoration, the remediation of those 13 prioritized lakes that we discussed a moment ago. The alternatives that were considered were do nothing, which really isn't an option, GeoWeb, GeoTube, and then the Armor Max, which is the Armor Reinforced Vegetative System.
Danny, can you give just a quick summary of why you do which of the three?
I'll get into a description of each one here in a second.
No problem.
Actually, on the next slide. So the do nothing is essentially exactly what it says. It's do nothing, and that's not feasible because we are part of why we're doing this is it's a regulatory requirement. So where we have drop-offs or erosion that's greater than 9 inches, Water Management District will and has actually required us to make that correction, and they're working with us to. We've provided a plan and we're implementing that plan, so that really isn't an option. GeoWeb was a process that we actually piloted in Pelican Preserve, and we piloted in Hampton Greens, Gateway Greens, Hampton Greens, yeah. And it's a good product. It's a very finicky product if you do not install it properly, and we did have some issues with that. And most importantly, for what you get out of it, it's the most expensive option. So although we do list it, it is a good product. It's not something that we're recommending moving forward. Next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Am I that boring already?
No.
The second option that was looked at was GeoTube. Now, this was discussed a lot, and we have not piloted this in Gateway. We have seen it in neighboring communities, and if installed properly, it's a very good it's a good product. It's a less expensive. It's actually the least expensive option. It's been received with mixed input from the community. So the biggest issue with that is a lot of the lake issues that we have at least these initial lakes have some fairly steep slopes, and it makes it a little more challenging with the GeoTube, especially if you're trying to keep material on top of that. If you do not have the ability to plant on top of it, you've got to plant in front of it, and we have a challenge with a lot of these lakes dropping off, so it makes littoral planting a lot more difficult. So the other issue that you can have is once the tube is damaged, it makes repairing a little bit of a challenge, and that can happen from lawn equipment and that sort of thing, or just over time sun damage. So the last option is the ARVS, or the armored system, which is actually what you have installed in the lakes 104, 6, 7, and 8. And so far it's turned out very, very well. It's the least it's the second least expensive, or the second most expensive, depending on how you want to say that, since we looked at 3 alternatives.
I like how you went with least expensive.
Yeah, I
We
figured for
appreciate
the
that.
purpose of this. The other part too with this is we're going to be talking in the future about littoral planting, and we have been talking about littoral planting, and that has been a direction of the board. And that armored reinforced vegetative system is for that purpose of accepting vegetation. Now, we do actually have, I think, a call scheduled with the manufacturer because some of the plantings that we may be talking about may result in requiring cutting of the system. But for the purpose of bank stabilization, that is was a fourth alternative. So if you'll go to the next slide. Looking at those from a comparison, a cost comparison, this is based on, our best estimate of information from what we have from systems that have been installed in Gateway or nearby. As you can see, the GeoWeb is the least expensive. And for the purpose of this, you can choose to ignore the contingency if you like, just making apples to apples, and for the purpose of saying that we were going after the $5 million loan for SRF, we held that number constant. But as you can see, the cost for the GeoWeb is the most expensive, GeoTube is the least, and then the ARVS is in the middle. Now that price is basically a complete system. So from bringing in the additional fill to installing the material to placing the rock and doing the restoration, that's a full cost per linear foot.
Hey, Danny, are these numbers based on, I know we talked about there being assessment of the lakes and determining where the issues are, but is this are these numbers based on a complete restoration holistically around the lake, or just those areas where we deemed critical?
Yeah, good question. Right now, and that's a very good question, because as you move forward with this program, and as you and I have talked, we obviously will want to look at where specific requirements are. As this is right now, this is a full system. So
Okay.
this is looking at what is the worst case. So it does not mean that you've got to go around the entire perimeter, but that's looking at that. So. Okay, so one of the requirements of the facilities planning process is that you've got to review and look at the environmental aspects, the environmental impacts, the environmental benefits. Of course, from the benefits side, obviously by restoring the lakes, we are creating a environmentally sensitive situation and bringing that into compliance with what the Water Management District requires. And by using an actual stabilization method, we're helping to prevent or restrict future erosion issues. From the actual environmental impacts, what we did as part of this process was reviewed databases for any adverse impacts to species, wetlands, and that sort of thing. So, and then that's reported in the facilities plan. So based on what our research has shown, and as you would expect for what we're dealing with, there are no known impacts to threatened or endangered species or habitat. So that being said, the selected alternative, what we're recommending and what the report recommends, is the armor reinforced vegetative system. So the steps to implement from here, we've talked about the process for submitting the facilities plan and associated documents to DEP. The next steps will be to perform the surveying, and in that case, we would be able to identify, Doug, that existing condition so we can then determine the best method for the entire perimeter, develop the design drawings. The design drawings would then be submitted to, along with the specifications, to DEP for their approval. They have to bless it. We would then get those back, send them out to bid, and then essentially move forward with construction. This is just I didn't have really any pictures in here, and I think presentations are required to have photos. So this does just kind of give you an idea. The top left is essentially typical erosion that you might have, and then you see going to the bottom left is essentially a lake bank being restored, regraded, and then the two in the middle are the vegetative system being installed, and then the picture on the right is what that looks like as a restored bank, and that does have the Armor Max material. That's at high water level. What you don't see, and I'm not sure if this one has it, but we have been installing rock and moving forward 57 stone on top of it, and it's created a really good look and a natural finish, and it creates a barrier between the water and the Armor Max itself from washing, from wave action and the soil washing off. So it's been a very good, clean look. The next view is very hard to see. It was a PDF, but essentially you see from top to bottom. At top, what you actually do is you install the Armor Max or that material, the armor reinforced vegetative system, in a trench. What the trench does is it acts as a collector or barrier that will prevent water that sheet flows from undermining the Armor Max once it's installed.
Armor Max?
The Armor Max or armored reinforced vegetative system, yes. So, and when that material is installed along the slope, it's actually pinned down and uses an anchoring system that uses soil pressure. So it's installed with an anchor, and then you essentially pull that back up tight through the soil until it keeps hold, and then you trim the anchor off up top, and that helps keep it in place. And then what you probably can't see, but it's on there, is then rock would be placed on top of that.
Danny, is there a risk, if you can go back one slide, you back up one, that farthest on the right-hand side?
Yes.
Okay?
Finish restoration?
Yeah. I know that, for example, in the back of our property, and I think across the lake as well, the power mowers actually ride down that, and I'm amazed that they're not in the lake, but they seem to make it every time. Is there a risk in having our landscapers, no matter where it is, whether it be in Pelican Reserve or Gateway or Stony Brook or whatever, should they instead be using,
Hand mower?
exactly, a weed whacker instead?
I will say there's always a risk. I'll also say that the majority of the lakes should, and I think what we're doing is restoring them to 6-to-1. So the shallower that slope is, the less risk or damage you'll have. I mean, we could certainly develop a protocol saying that, yes, we want you to use a line trimmer for that bottom, say 5 feet. There's always that risk. I don't know if we've had any issues on the ones that have been installed so far.
So you guys are going for 6-to-1? I thought it was 4-to-1. So my mistake.
Yeah, so obviously the shallower, and there, I will say, I'll caveat that with there are certainly going to be lakes where we're not going to have that ability.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, that would certainly help protect your investment if you just generally put that requirement out to the landscaping folks, saying, hey, bottom 5 feet from the water line, whatever that may be, 5 feet, 7 feet, use a line trimmer, would certainly help protect your investment.
Okay.
So this part's a little premature, but what we will be asking is once you've received public comment, is essentially to pass a resolution adopting the facilities plan, incorporating any applicable comments and Scrivener errors. So with that, I am done unless you have any questions of me.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be some questions. May we entertain Mr. Gebhardt, who's.
If you could go back to the plan view.
Mr. Chairman, just for what you may want to do, just to show the agency that you had a public hearing, I would suggest that all public speakers, such as Mr. Tinkle did, sign up so we have the slips, so Danny can also include those in the package to go to DEP. So Bob, after you speak, if you could sign up. Thank you.
Go back one slide. Now, I want the plan view. Is this drainage for water?
Yeah, that's
That's the drain spout type drainage, because that's not what we did in Pelican. We were quite upset about that, thought we were getting. But this is the new recommendation, to have that automatically.
Well, what I'll say is reason why that's there is we hit a couple of challenges in lakes 106, 7, and 8, I think particularly, and I think all of them we're going to see this is you do have cases where either you do or don't already have pipes. And what we actually saw extreme divers doing was they were, whether it was temporary or not, they were trying to run the pipe over the Armor Max, and we said no.
We went all over the world with it, that's why I brought it.
Yeah, we said.
We thought that's what we were getting, we didn't get it.
realize that
That's okay.
this is dealing with an existing, situation. So as we're there, if we either see a problem that was caused by a point source erosion from a downspout or lack of a downspout, where we may be specifically asking to add that, or where it may exist already, we just want to make sure that the vendor is installing it the way that we want it installed, so it's not creating and interfering with the,
And that was
with the
exactly,
material.
downspout drainage is what caused my problem.
Go sign one.
I will. Downspout drainage is what caused the problems in Pelican wants to build.
Yes.
And we thought we were gonna get this. We went back and forth with our full knowledge and all, but I guess at the time we used the engineering judgment, and we ended up with something less than this. And we wanted to make sure we didn't do that again. We wanted to, so that's why I brought it up here. If that's the standard, and if you're not gonna do that, then it ought to be shown the light of day early in the process.
Danny, please continue at the podium for us. I was intrigued by what Mr. Governor had to say a second ago, and I was looking at this schedule schematic again, and the one that I'm looking at very closely with my bifocal says exit stormwater on that white line
Okay.
through there. Now, Mr. Gebhardt just said a moment ago, if I heard him correctly, that the problem over at Pelican was with gutters and downspouts, which caused some problem. Bob, did I understand that correctly?
Exactly correct. That was the primary thing that drove us to move it.
In this schematic, again, are you going to hook up gutters and downspouts to this and exit that water underneath?
Well, here was the issue. In all cases, we were always gonna put a bubble-up box here that takes the building to this point, beginning of the easement. The only question we had, we wrestled with, is from this point, do we go under the Armor Max to the pond? Do we go over the Armor Max to the pond? What do we do? And as it turned out, we terminated at the bubble-up box, and the water is now going to just cascade down here, knowing that we've got a foundation that will not be challenged with erosion. It was, like an ugly kid, you still love it. It's not what we wanted. I call it my brother-in-law. It's not what I was expecting, but I'm gonna have to do it. So that's where we asked, what our preference was. In all cases, we wanted it to go under this. And again, it was a pilot, so we were all learning and giving and taking.
Then what you're recommending, Danny, is that stormwater from gutters and downspouts are going to be channeled underneath the new work?
Let me caveat that if there is, not necessarily, if there's not a downspout there, it doesn't mean that we're specifically telling them to go and install that. We're saying if there's one existing already, some of them have a bubble up that ends before the lake bank, and it actually sheet flows and it creates erosion. Others have a small channel, then that channel follows down and that's created. Others actually do have pipes that go in already. We're not necessarily saying to go and create that moving forward. We certainly can. We don't have it in the plan right now. We certainly can. But we're saying is that where they exist or where it's needed, this is how we want it done.
Board members have questions for Danny.
I'm good. Danny's memo was really good, thank
Yes,
you.
it was,
I just have a statement, and Danny and I talked about this. $5 million is a lot of money. For 13 lakes, you're looking at $384,000 per lake. What I would expect is when, which you did touch on, when we go through and we do the evaluations, we determine what is critical, especially if it's resident facing. I completely understand, and I've lived on a lake, and I understand how personal that we feel towards the lakes, especially if there's erosion, and it's impeding into our property, or maybe it's causing some, some other issues. But I would suggest that we fix what is critical on the resident side. If there are other outliers on non-resident side that don't require us to lay the the ARV, what is it,
ARVS.
Yeah, ARVS, that we not add that additional expense. So if, because I've heard projections that are even more than 5 million on the high end. I would like for us to be very strategic in the solution and try to manage downward instead of upward.
I think you'll hear that again in a minute, by the way.
Okay.
On more expensive. But to touch on that, I will say yes, that that has been discussed at length with the with the board. I fully expect that the first 2 or 3 or 4 that we deal with will be a little more involved, because we're trying to address the worst ones first, and then as we go down the line, they'll get a little less encompassing of the perimeter.
Yeah.
But certainly, that's what we would want to do, is look on an individual basis.
Yeah.
Lake by lake basis.
If I may, you have explained to us innumerably that each lake is unique. It's like a living person. You
Yeah.
can't make generalities and expect them to hold on the whole bunch that we're working on. Mr. Gebhardt, did you have a statement?
I just wanted to comment, we have repaired 3 of our major erosion problems, our first 3 problems. And we did it for about $100,000 per
Okay.
area we did. Always did behind the residence house. We don't do, if it's in a conservation area, we don't do it if it's on the golf course side. Some other entity will do that. We have protected the residents and the erosion on ours. And we've also explored where Armor Max is needed, but where it's not quite as severe, we just did some with something called coconut mesh, which is
Right.
about 10%
We talked about
cost.
coconut mesh,
So, yeah,
backfill with
You just
coconut,
gotta
yeah.
use common
Right.
sense and you'll get your money's worth.
Yeah, and that's where I hope that we do have the operational oversight gaining from you and staff to make sure that you're advising us on making the best solutions for, if we can save a couple coins here and there, that's always a good thing, right? So,
Now, this is public hearing, so anyone in the audience that wishes to make a comment or a question about this presentation, now is your time to come to the podium.
This doesn't apply to Pelican, but I'll try to share this with you guys.
Again, for the record.
Bob Geppert, Pelican Preserve. We have, and a ponds group, we have evolved to the point that we realize now the root cause of 90% of our erosion and washout concerns are the absence of proper rain spouts, gutters, and conveyance into the ponds. And the reason I'm bringing that up is if you don't do that in conjunction with this, you're going to be doing it again in 5 or 10 years. You got to fix the root of the problem. If you can handle your rain spout runoff, then once you do this, you'll never have to do it again. And the last component of putting in the downspouts and gutters is they need yearly inspections. You got to hire somebody, and this is where we go to our HOAs and tell them, you need to take that on. You got to inspect your piping that it's not collapsed or damaged or blocked. And if they're doing that, we won't have these other problems. Yes, sir.
Now, does this bubbler that is the big black box on does that satisfy your requirements?
It's a pilot. We'll find out. We are optimistic that it will. And we were assured that if it didn't, we'll take remedial action. But in every place, we have the bubblers, and we have it as a line of demarcation between the homeowners, the HOAs, and the easement. And our focus is like a laser on the easement. We're protecting our asset, the lake. So, but we want the homeowners to all step up, and this is a major, major initiative that we're going through right now. We didn't realize this when we first started it. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Ed, did you have your hand up? Name for the record, please.
Ed Tinkle, Ben Pine Drive.
How'd I do? Is that okay?
Yes, sir. I know Mr. Tinkle was focused. I thought he would do it, but it's always good to make sure. Thank you, sir.
What I'd like to do is go back about 9 months. We started this whole thing, if you recall, with this document here back in September of 2015. This is the report that identified the roughly 50 ponds in Gateway that led to this whole issue of erosion control, pond aeration, and littorals all through the pond standards documentation. At that time, if you recall, the initial SRF application that Danny put together was about $14.5 million at that time, based upon best guesses that we had on these ponds. The decision was made by this board at that time to phase the project. And what we did in September, October was to do that, and we took and divided up the ponds, not 59 ponds, because we took out 4, 104, 106, 107, 108 as having done. And then I believe we had 5 ponds that were in areas that had no residential inclusion at all, FPL and things like that. So what we have here is, I believe, 13 ponds in phase 1, 15 ponds in phase 2, and 18 ponds in phase 3, which 28, 46. So you still have some ponds that are missing, but they have had a reason to be left out. This is phase 1 of a 3-phase project. What I've given you, and this is based upon the numbers prorated off the facility plan. I identify phase 1 and identify the ponds. They're the same as Danny's got. And he's got the $5 million cost estimate, which I don't have a problem with. I've reviewed the numbers and everything looks fine. I do believe that Bob brings up some very good points that I'll get into in a minute relative to this pipe that penetrates from the shoreline out to the water itself. We need to talk about that. And I don't believe that money is in the project at all. But there's more than just erosion on this whole project. The stormwater maintenance plan and the entire stormwater plan is made up of 2 other components, and that's the pond aeration and littoral plantings, which we've agreed to. What I've tried to do is to itemize, to give you an idea of, at the 30,000-foot level, what you're looking at based upon the best known numbers of what this thing's going to cost over time. We're looking at that $5 million, plus we're looking at about $434,000 in pond aeration. We're looking at about $60,000 in littoral plantings at 25%, and the fish barriers about another $45,000. So this initial phase 1 to do all the components of it is about $5,534,000. But that's not the important thing. And this is a decision that I don't know that you made purposely, but you made it. And that was, you exempted all of the costs, what we call soft cost. I've got identified here about $602,000. Danny had around $565,000. I originally came up with about $735,000, so I split the difference with him on the basis of inspection. But you've got about $602,000 of costs, soft cost, to implement this project that you have nowhere in your budget. You have nowhere in your budget. If you do this project over a 2-year period, which is pretty much common sense to do, then that $602,000 is about $300,000 a year. You're going to add to the $365,000 a year for principal and interest payment on that $5 million note. I can tell you that's not the way to do a project. We need to go back and have SRF add and include this soft cost, the $602,000, and come up with about $6 million. Well, if you want to do aeration and if you want to do littorals. If you don't want to do aeration and littorals, then you could probably get away with about $5.6, $5.7 million instead of a $5 million loan. But it seems to me to be just silly to rob our capital reserves to pay for soft cost at the tune of $300,000 a year for 2 years, when we can debt finance it at a portion of that cost. And as I understand it, you have that wherewithal to do that today when you approve this. Just amend the application to include the soft cost and increase the total cost up to accordingly cover everything that it takes to do the project. Whether you want to do the aeration, whether you want to do the littorals, that's a totally separate deal. But what I've tried to do here is point out to you what the cost of this project is going to be. That's phase 1. I've also got on here phase 2, using the same scenario that Danny used in the methodology in calculating these costs. I came out with $6,257,000 for erosion only on the phase 2 ponds, $470,000 aeration, $55,000 in littoral plantings, $15,000 fish barrier. Throw in the non-construction costs, and we're at $7,501,000. Same thing for ponds in group 3, $6,601,000. Construction costs, $7,168,000 when you throw in the littorals and aeration. and a grand total of $7,913,000. We're looking at about $21.6 million to do everything, to do these projects on the basis that we're going. And that doesn't include all of the golf course side that we don't even have in this project whatsoever, where obviously to go in and put something like the Armamax is just a waste of money. What we need to do go in there is to backfill, redo the slopes, and then use something like the cocoa matting, and then to get the littorals on those. But none of that money to do that type of thing is included in this facility plan, or even included in the numbers I've got. I simply just took his numbers and the methodology that he used for these first 13 ponds and applied it to phase 2 with 15 ponds and phase 3 with 18 ponds. My recommendation going down what Bob said earlier relative to that storm drain system. We get a little bit different situation in Gateway, and where HOA hat. We don't have the wherewithal in our covenants to do what needs to be done, but I think we have the ability that you can provide the asset to make it happen should the property owner want to do it. And what I'm talking about is on these first 13 ponds, when you go into the design phase, I would strongly suggest that on a survey, you go lot by lot, and where you have a depression, a swale coming out between those lots, which you're going to find a lot of them in Gateway Greens, believe me. I would take and have the contractor, the first thing before they bring in any backfill, before they do anything, is cut that 4-inch or 6-inch pipe from down at the bottom of the toe of the slope, bring that in and install it just like Danny's got, only in this picture where it comes out and goes up like this, you might want to do this and U it up such that the homeowner can bring it down and tie into that line and have a discharge in the future. How many of those you will get the property owners to install from their house out to that point is anybody's guess. Alls I know is we've looked at it in Gateway Greens and talked to our attorney, and we have no ability whatsoever to force property owners to do that. The only other option that would allow you to do, if you can't force it, is perhaps you can take and put like what we call a golf course area drain, maybe one of those little 12-inch boxes, set that at the top of that and try to catch that runoff before it sheets flows into the pond. What Danny was talking about on 106, 107, and 108, we already have, 1, 2, 3 pipes that are already laying on top of the ground that were done after the fact. And it really is, it's not the way to do it. It's not the way to do it. If we're gonna put those pipes in, those perforated tiles, the drain tiles, do it as a first thing. Make sure that's on the plans, let the contractor come in and cut that trench, backfill it, then bring in your backfill material, shape your 4-to-1, 6-to-1 slopes, then do your notch, just like you said before, and take it down. To me, that's the easier way of doing it and the correct way of doing it. But that money is not included in either the facility plan budget or in my numbers, so it is an added expense. Relative to the facilities plan, I totally agree with Danny's comments on the do-nothing alternative. It's simply not acceptable to the members of the community, nor is it acceptable to South Florida Water Management District. I believe that the do-nothing option doesn't exist in Gateway, and there will be those that ask why not. Well, the answer is because the state's not going to let us. We have to go in and do this stuff. The issue is what's the most cost-effective and economically feasible way of doing it. The second item I have is a problem, and I've said this since we got involved. I am 100% behind this methodology that Danny is selecting. My only concern is that I don't know that the people that make the call at the state are going to approve it. We're going with what is, in essence, appears to me to be a hard surface. And the requirements are you can't have greater than 25% hard surface. We really need to, before we step out and start doing this design and proceeding with this alternative, especially with the stone, which again, I'm 100% behind, and I think if you did a survey of 1,200 residents in Gateway Greens, they'll be 100% behind it also. But I think before we go too far down the road, we better bring the county and the state in here and verify that they are not going to object to us doing it in that methodology. We need to have the answer to that because the standards are such that you can't do it. Right now, it's 25% is the maximum amount you can do. And that's not what we have been doing. So we need to get a clarification of that. I would hope they would go along, they would look at 106, 107, and 108. where on 2 of those, we did the stone surface on about 3/4, and it's beautiful, like Danny said, it's beautiful, looks great. But where we didn't do it, on the golf course side, where we're talking about going in littorals, the erosion has already started. Over the top of the fabric, the erosion has already started. Last night's gully washer did a pretty good number on it. So it's one of those things we have to cover it. The other one, you were talking about the mowing. I don't know that the mowing is that much of an issue because you're not going to take the grass to anything below the control elevation. So you really don't have a fabric except, as Danny shows in this picture, your control elevation's this point, you bring the fabric up and wrap it around in the deal. So this is all sod to this point here. You're not going to put sod down under the water. You're going to put the sod down under the water, you're going to have dead sod. So you're going to go down to that control elevation, and that's pretty much on everybody's yard, the high tide place. We're in July or August when the water levels are all up. And in fact, sometimes during that period, they go up as much as 12 inches above control elevation. And it will get into your sod, but your mowing guys, I don't think are going to have that much of an impact on damage. And you certainly, I would hope, we're not going to sod anything that goes down onto that 6-to-1 slope because it isn't going to live. That's where we were talking about using some of the littorals like the Bayacopa, that green material that can survive on that. So I would really like to make sure that we're covering ourselves on that issue with Lee County and South Florida as far as the hard surfaces. The next item is that you all have elected to go with S25% littorals. Right now, Elle is talking about going out and doing, in fact, I believe we've even received bids, going out and putting the littorals on 106, 7, and 8. The issue is way we're talking right now is bare root product, not the cup that's recommended by the county because of a apparent lack of being able to find any. So we're going to put that bare root, and as talking to Tyler, what it looks like we're going to propose to do is put that into the material that's setting on top. In other words, the topsoil that's on top of the fabric, so that we don't have to cut or penetrate that Armamax material. But the issue is that we're going to do that, then we have the standards that call for, our standards say that on a 4-to-1 slope, we go out to the 1 foot depth, which is 4 feet out, and then we plant the littorals 1 foot apart, 3 abreast, the full perimeter of whatever that area is. If it's 25% on 106, 7, and 8, then it's one of the 4 sides of the rectangle or of the square. So, and again, that's not in here. But when they're doing the planning, and I talked to Danny about it, and he agrees, is that as we do the design, not preliminary design, this is preliminary design right now, facility plan, but when he gets into final plans, I think there needs to be a plan on how you're going to incorporate that littoral planning and where that littoral planning is going to be, and maybe even consider some of those areas where you can't go with the Armamax or don't have the ability to go with the Armamax and go with the cocoa material. Make sure it's understood, because you're going to have residents, especially when you get up to Cypress Cave, Bristol Park, Magnolia Lakes, where those are 100% residential. You're going to have ones that are going to have, to meet the 25%, you're going to have some that have littorals in their yard, some that don't. Yeah. So you need to be making that consideration. The other thing is that, again, I know that you don't have this and you haven't been thinking about this as being a part of the project cost. But to me, when you get in here and you're doing this work, at least if you don't do the pond aeration, to me, while you're in there with all these products, and I'm telling you, I'm catching hell on a daily basis because of what we're doing over on 104 coming back in with stone setting in yards and porta potties out in the street. People's tolerance with this doesn't last very long. So they want you to get in and get out. So if we could do that littoral work while we're there, I think we would be way ahead. The only other thing that I saw in the facility plan that this goes back, shows my age, but when I've done these things, and I've done hundreds of facilities plans, it used to be that you had to tell the public everything you knew. But we're not quite telling the public everything we know right now. And that is that we need to tell the public, what does $5 million mean? What does $6 million mean in this? Well, I took my estimate of $6,141,000 for phase 1, should we go to that full value, and I just simply took the interest rate, no operation and maintenance cost whatsoever, and this is going to have operation and maintenance cost, but that's over and beyond. But I took that $6,141,000, came up with a $376,000 a year annual P&I divide that by 6,000 ERUs in Gateway Greens, Pelican's not involved, and that works out to be about $63 per year per house. This is going to have a significant impact on the budgets of Gateway CDD. We're right now at about 360. A couple of years ago, we jumped. We had a conniption fit on talking about raising the rates by $4. We're talking about raising these things to 18, 20% for one phase. But the public needs to know what we're going to be talking about on the expenditures of this stuff. We're talking about one heck of a lot of money, and I could easily see in the next 2 to 5 years our assessments doubling, easily doubling, to cover both the capital cost, the operation and maintenance cost of what we've basically kicked down the road for 20-some years and allowing this stuff to get in this position. But again, this whole thing includes more than just erosion control. It includes the pond aeration, and it includes the littoral placement. It's up to you all as how you want to implement that and add to that the big picture of what it's going to cost to do this. I believe that $21 million figure is very, very, very accurate. And in fact, maybe even on the low side, because some of these issues of the drainage situations that we haven't been able to take. I'd love to have the ability, like what Bob was talking about, that we could do in Gateway relative to the homeowners and being able to facilitate some of this drainage problem that's created by sheet flow going off and erosion. Pond 128, I don't know if any of the board members got to go over there and look at that you've, I guess, paid Aquagenics about $18,000, $14,000, if we talked about it a couple of weeks ago at the meeting. And look at that mess. Look at that mess. Purely caused by erosion. A lot of money, and we've got that all over Gateway. And the problem is that when it was built, the methodology for the runoff just made it worse because there wasn't any little swale to capture that water. It's straight sheet flow off. Now, if the two property owners have to get together and have a swale to where it comes to a common point, that's something that we can fix pretty easy right now. Go in there and drop in an inlet, take it out and down to the water, and we're done with it. But when you have a sheet flow across the whole yard, now we get back to where we got some real issues of long-term erosion that we got to keep an eye on, which is a maintenance issue. My thing is my recommendation is that the board, I totally accept the facility plan and agree with it, but I would say certainly have Danny verify these non-construction costs. Just reading them off here, you've got $60,000 in planning. This is just for phase one. $60,000 in planning costs, $150,000 in the design cost. And keep in mind, this money's going to be spent in the next 90 to 120 days, people. You've got about $75,000 in construction-related services. You've got $156,000 in part-time inspection. And I would not enter this project if you're not going to at least commit to having Tetra Tech inspected on a part-time basis. We've seen what happens. I don't care who the vendor is. If they go out there and start doing the work and you're not watching them, when we're talking about $5 million, that's worth having eyes in the field checking to see what they're doing. Surveying costs, $50,000. Bathymetric cost, $18,000. Pond coring, sampling, testing, $18,000. Legal fees, budgetary number, $25,000. And SRF compliance, $50,000. We got a heck of a lot of money in soft costs that we don't have budgeted right now, and my recommendation to the board would be up the amount of the facility plan SRF loan from $5 million to whatever it takes to include this cost. Don't use our capital reserves to pay for this. Debt finance it.
Thank you, Ed.
That's it. Thank you very much.
You're giving me a headache.
So hey, Danny, what do you think, based on your presentation stating that the estimates are for complete restoration? We don't believe that we have to do that for all the lakes. What do you think your variance is?
Well, the lakes that we're already looking, the first, I think, 3 or 4, we're already not including the entire lake. So let's say you're doing 2/3, so 2/3 of.
So potentially, if you take that estimate and we do a 2/3, I have to do
Let's
the
say
math.
there's 4 sides, there's 3/4, let's say.
So the money that Ed's talking about, just for phase one, the $602,000, there is a good chance that we can absorb that into the variance by not having to do complete.
Yes, and I
And
will
that's
say.
soft, of course, but.
Well, I will say the request for inclusion that was sent in, and that's the first thing that goes in, that was sent in specifically for construction. So, I've actually, in fact, even before I came here today, I've talked to, DEP and asked if the board wants to include those soft costs as part of the process, can we do that? And they said, certainly, we can revise that request for inclusion form and simply send that in. Now, that's separate from the actual facilities plan itself, but that is actually the first part of the Bible that they use for what can be included. So as it sits right now, the only thing that's been requested have been construction-related funds. So if that's what the direction of the board is, and I recommend that you do that, at least for the ability to use the SRF process for the soft costs, that we revise that request for inclusion form and to include the soft costs. Now, the planning costs, the facilities planning costs, you would not be able to, because that's already been performed. But moving forward, anything moving forward, you certainly would be able to do that, and then finance that as part of the loan process.
Have you all read the facility plan?
Sure.
You all read it? To answer your question, Doug, if you go on each of these maps, which are the 13 ponds, I think Tetra Tech's done a great job on this, except for the fact it's harder to hell to make a print of this without getting the whole picture on it. But they show you the area of the lake, and they show you the circumference or the distance around the shoreline. Then they've got over here in a little legend what their assumption is on the length of what the work is going to include, and then their cost estimates based on that. So you can go through there, for example, Pond 60, right off the bat, 2,994 lineal feet of shoreline, 2,605 feet is going to be repaired. And that numbers varies, but it's because the majority of these ponds are residential, and the majority of these ponds, because they're in phase one, because they were bad, you're gonna find that the percentage is high. As we get down further into some of the other ponds in phase three, especially some of those in Silver Lakes, they aren't quite as bad. So some of them, the techniques and the methodologies might be able to allow them to skimp on this, and instead of maybe going to the 75, 80% level, you might be able to get down to 50% or even less on it. But all those numbers are in here, and that's how Danny and those guys did the calculations. And I checked all of it, and all the numbers look very good. They
Yeah,
look
that's what
very
I was looking
reasonable.
at with your phase two and your phase three. I would imagine that those.
I did the
costs
same
would-
proration.
Okay, I would imagine they would be lower because of the
We hope.
severity.
Either go lower or change the methodology of the method. Instead of going with this, maybe we can go with a backfill and a matting and cocoa mat.
Yeah.
And
So-
it really reduce the cost, but I don't know if.
This
if-
was worst case scenario.
When you go around Gateway Greens and look at all the ponds just in Gateway Greens where I'm at, that's not going to happen. The ponds are bad.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Ed. Would
Thanks,
you
Ed.
please sit down and let Danny, would you come back up to the podium for a
Yes, sir.
moment? These extra costs that, I'm gonna use that term that Ed just pointed out on his sheet, the total $602,000 for phase one. I was of the opinion that that was equivalent to the 610 contingency that you have on this sheet. Am I right, wrong, or partially right, or how?
It's not specifically meant for that, it's meant for a contingency, but certainly for the purpose of this, that could cover those costs. And I think the numbers that we've estimated, which I think, have been shared, I hope to be on the high side, and there's board direction for what level would you want, and the biggest single item cost in there, is, I believe, the inspection services, and to what degree would, does the board want that? As Ed mentioned, he would definitely want to see if we're spending that money on the investment of the improvement, that you have some level of inspection, and I don't disagree with that. And so what we had estimated was part-time cost, but it was not intended to be the contingency, but certainly that would cover those soft costs, could be covered through that dollar amount, but it was just a coincidence that they were of similar price.
Nicely wiggled. Ed said a lot of things that were very important. But the thing that caught my attention the most is that these, non-construction costs, the 600,000, and anything else for that matter, be included in our proposals so that we're using the state revolving fund cash to pay for this stuff and not our capital that we have now. In other words, we have to word this thing so that everything is included and so that we don't get down the line and find out that some auditor is gonna come and say, no, your proposal didn't include this or that, and that kind of stuff will kill you.
Two things I would recommend for that is in where we have the cost estimate, we can simply include multiple lines for those soft costs prior to finalizing the facilities plan. And the other thing, as I was mentioning, I would, at the same time, I would send in a revised request for inclusion form, which also identifies those soft costs and that way it allows you to seek that. So we could simply make those two changes, one to the facilities plan and two to the request for inclusion.
Put everything but the kitchen sink in it.
Well, and don't forget, what you're talking about, the 600, that's the non-construction cost. There's still the 534,000 for the aeration, littorals, and the fish berry.
You're either gonna add them in this one or you're gonna do it as a supplemental loan.
The,
Follow-up loan.
my recommendation on that, and this was presented to the board previously, if the board remembers, Doug wasn't here, but this was originally, when we prepared the request for inclusion, it was for $15 million or 14 and some change. And that was just a hard pill to swallow for all of that. And that included those multiple items. So my suggestion is you let this sit as it sits, because this component has been studied and identified, and that's what your facilities plan is prepared for. In April and I have already talked, and our recommendation is that over the course, and Ed and I have as well, over the course of the next year, you better define what your needs are for littorals and your aeration through bathymetric studies, and you actually come with a plan for next year, and you include that in your budgeting cycle for next year. You're not in any imminent, need right now today, because you don't know enough today. We know that there are problems. We know that there are things that you need to do, but our recommendation is you put money in the budget to do that analysis, and you can come back in next year or at some point in the future and seek funds through SRF or at least through the budgeting process once you can better quantify what that is. Ed's numbers may be perfectly on for what that is, but you have not studied those yet. So we definitely agree that costs should be considered for evaluating that and making that determination.
But that's what, Ed, you were talking about, you wanted the littorals and the aeration to go along with the lake improvement.
Yeah, I've argued that since day one, but it's been the decision to bust this thing up into sections. I totally agree with what Danny is saying. I would, though, put into the soft cost the bathymetric, because that is a soft cost. It's an engineering, it's a design component. Go on ahead and do that as a part of the SRF loan. Get your surveying. We've got to get the surveying on these ponds. We're just kidding ourselves until we get this surveying done. He needs it for the design. We need it to have it for control elevation so that we know where we're putting this stuff. But go on ahead and do those soft costs as a part of this project and include them in the facility plan. Then allow that to give you the data to come back then and get a subsequent loan to actually do littoral planting and to do pond aeration.
Okay.
There's a lot of engineering work, both planning and design, Danny's 100% right, on both the littoral side and the pond aeration side. We're not ready to jump into that, but we need the data, and to get that data, we need to be able to budget to pay for the vendors who do it.
Okay.
If I can add on to that as well, as far as the aeration goes, we don't know that the initial lakes, we don't know that every single one of them are going to be recommended for aeration, but a pretty simple cost is to consider if a lake is going to have aeration, what do we need to consider that may impact that? So littorals are one thing, but aeration, you're actually physically gonna have to cut through to run components out into the lake. So that's a pretty easy thing to identify and go ahead and put in, you know, whether it be a conduit or a pipe for that future. That's a pretty inexpensive thing
All right.
to do to accommodate that for the
Okay.
future.
Thanks.
So is the recommendation to raise the amount? We'd been asking for 5 million, do we wanna ask for 6 million and include these soft costs, is that?
It wouldn't change the facilities plan, and I think if, yes, ultimately, yes, and I don't know that it would go to 6, but it would go to, in that, probably close to $6 million range, and we would simply just, modify the cost to include those soft costs. If we wanna say 6 for the purpose of rounding the numbers, that, you know, that might be the easiest thing to do, because we will need to make a, you know, a resolution.
Put a table and shows the non-construction costs. It's simple,
Yeah.
very simple.
We're not asking for 6 million, we're asking for the ability to, draw against whatever that number is.
That's all I'm asking.
So is it
So-
worth changing the amount, or do you say leave it at 5 and we'll draw on that as we're doing the work?
I would recommend that we change it, because it allows us then to spend that money and account for the soft costs, and not have to pull it out of your budget directly.
Okay.
Very good. Other questions or statements for this public hearing?
And I guess, Mr. Chairman, if you want to ask, are there any other members of the public who wish to make any comment on this proposed SRF plan?
I thought I just did.
Just make sure.
I just have one off the wall. I've been told that if you don't put the aeration in the ponds, there's an engineering point in time, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, that you gotta dredge. Part of the rationale why we put them in Pelican was to avoid that future cost. Your ponds are older than ours. I don't know if you're approaching that, it might be a good offset to sell it to the state.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Any further comments from the audience or the board?
I would suggest you close the public hearing then, Mr. Chairman, and then have discussion.
Exactly where I was.
Thank you, sorry.
Mr. Attorney.
I'm sorry. Mr. Chair.
After hearing all of these comments, questions, and answers for this item, I hereby declare this public hearing closed, and I thank you all for your attention and your work, and Margaret has something for me.
You need to approve the plan.
Well, I think you need to approve the plan, I think, as amended and indicate
Right.
what's, and also authorize, adopt a resolution approving the plan, authorize the chair to sign a resolution, and thereafter for the engineer to transmit the resolution and the amended adopted SRF plan to DEP.
Say it again.
Right, no, Cale?
Yes, that sounds like everything that needs to be in there. That can just be done by motion though, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that needs to be done now so that they can get the application in. Tony
Correct.
just
Would
gave
you,
a good
would
motion.
you make that motion, please, Margaret?
So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the stormwater facilities plan and incorporating the applicable comments and corrections and increasing the SRF request to 6 million. Any further comments?
Just wanted to, know, Danny, do we need to, contact the county for the hard water the hard surface?
We have on, in fact, Tyler and I were just talking about that. We have on numerous occasions, and recently, probably about 2.5 weeks ago, Tyler actually talked to the county and suggested that they come out and see it, and we set up a time. He since emailed them on multiple occasions, and they've not responded. So, we can continue to do that. We can call them, but, the ball's kind of in their court, but we'll keep reaching out to them.
Could this cause a problem for us?
Well, I think what I would suggest is that, have a discussion on that topic after the board votes on the motion and the adoption of the resolution approving the plan, and then we can, I think it is a good topic for discussion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. The board will stand in recess for 10 minutes.
And we won't forget the question. No, it's been an interesting. Good question.
You know, Rick. Yeah, I just, there's a little bit of scribble on that, so.
Oh, yeah, I saw John, I'm sorry. He's a nice guy, all you guys.
Can